Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for another episode of the Choosify Radio podcast. I wanted to make a special announcement ahead of this week's episode because this week, our book, Choosify, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence, is being released. This has been a 2-year labor of love, and I'm so proud and excited to be able to make this announcement that you can find this book anywhere that books are sold. And to the thousands of you that have already put in a pre-order for this book, I mean, as we started to see those numbers come through, we were truly overwhelmed by your response and by your desire to help us get this message out there. And at a very personal level, it is a super exciting day for Brad, myself, and Chris. For those of you that are hearing about this for the first time, everything that we talk about on this show is to reinforce the principles that were brought together with this book. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, or maybe you joined us within the last several months, and you've been really impressed by the quality of the information that's been presented, but you're wondering, like, where do I start? And you listen to episode 100 of our podcast and you're like, okay, that's pretty cool. And maybe you're even considering going back to the very first episode, but you want to know the most efficient way to start incorporating these principles into your life. This book is a manual, a blueprint for exactly that. To order a copy, you can go to choosify.com/book or anywhere the books are sold on October 1st. Thank you so much for your interest, your feedback, and your continued support. All right, my friends, let's get back to the show.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, everyone, super excited to dive in today's episode. We are getting the opportunity and the privilege to talk with Tori Dunlap from her first 100K. She's on a mission to help women reach their first 100K by the age, in her case, by the age of 25. And whether that means paying down debt or earning more or just having this transformation in your life that allows you to have the mindset to accomplish this, what she is doing is remarkable. She's an award-winning writer and has been featured most recently at the Plutus Awards at FinCon, acknowledging the fantastic work that she's doing. We wanted to go behind the scenes and explore a little bit of her story, her own personal evolution, whether or not she reached her goal of 100K by 25. And man, I'm telling you, along the way, we are going to uncover some incredible information talking about salary negotiation, really working in the trenches to set yourself up for this fantastic journey to financial independence. To help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this for a while. We had the good fortune of meeting Tori last year at FinCon. Diving into her story, it's amazing. I mean, I wish I had Tori in my life when I was 22, 23, and I was thinking about negotiating that next job, negotiating the salary. So this information is especially important for people starting out, but frankly, it's good for everyone. I just am so excited to learn her very specific actionable tips. So with that, Tori, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Y'all are making me blush over here. I'm so excited to be here.
Goal achieved. No, thank you for joining us. This is going to be so much fun. And I guess the first question our audience has, you just turned 25. This episode is going out on September 30th. Where are you on your goal to reach 100K by 25?
Yeah, so I turned 25 in July, and the joke was always, as long as I hit the 100K the day before I turned 26, I can still say I'm 25 when I did it. So as of this taping, I should be there unless we have some sort of zombie apocalypse, but I should be at 100K, which is so exciting.
Well, I'm never one to root for zombie apocalypses, but I suspect there's like a solid chance that you, by the time that this is released in just a couple weeks, you could say, I just passed it. Like on the day, you might even be able to strategically play it. You know what? Maybe I'll just pick up an extra hour. You know, maybe I'm there. I'm right now.
Let me amp up my savings rate 1%. Yes.
No lattes, no avocado toast. We're going to crush this thing. It's going to happen. Let's dial into this. Like 100K by 25. You know, there is something to be said for that first 100K being the hardest. You work and you work and you work and it doesn't feel like it's moving. And then suddenly you get that first 100K and you realize compounding is real. and now it's working for me. And you've kind of set this trajectory. We talk about this number, Coast Fi, this idea that you can get to this certain amount. You get this certain amount of traction early in life that if you were to just steady state it, never save another dollar again, you could have that normal, successful, traditional retirement. And the power of that is you have time on your side. So when you combine time with tactics, wow, that's incredibly powerful. Let's go back to you, like as a kid. Were you driven early on? Were you always side hustling, always looking for the tactics? Like, where does your money story begin?
Oh yeah, I was so ambitious as a kid. I was that straight A student who had a million things going on after school, who was in every play and musical and also doing T-ball and piano lessons and all these things. I really truly do have my parents to thank for all of this. So I was privileged enough to have a really great financial education growing up. I saw my dad negotiate our cable bill every 3 months. He would literally call and negotiate the bill down. I saw my mom pay bills twice a month on the 13th and the 21st. She still uses Quicken from like 98 to pay bills and to balance the checkbook. So I saw this happening. And then I was also privileged enough to actually start my first business when I was 9. So I owned 15 vending machines, the kind where you put a quarter in and you get a handful of candy out. So I owned these machines and all of the profits went to my college fund. It was a no way novel. Like I didn't invent anything. I didn't go on Shark Tank, but I learned how to run a business. So I learned profit and loss statements. I was opening my first checking and savings account when I was 10 years old. And then after 11 years of that business, I actually sold it to a 10-year-old who also happens to be named Tori, because that's how this crazy world works. So now she's doing the same thing with her parents. But it was not only having just a great financial education of seeing my parents be really responsible with money, but also managing my own money myself. So I really learned how to dig deep into the trenches of how to manage your money, how to be responsible and make good choices. And when I graduated college, I knew the business thing was rare, but I thought, okay, everybody knows not to overspend on credit cards. Everybody knows to start saving their money and negotiate their pay. I realized very quickly, of course, that this is just not the case. So I was the friend all of my female friends were coming to for advice and guidance. And I was like, okay, with this privilege comes this responsibility to share this information. And thus her first 100K was born.
I want to get to first 100K, but as you're telling your story and you specifically mentioned when you started this vending machine business, if you had the video right now, Brad's like brain exploded. He's writing at 9? At 9?
Yeah. Yeah. I was 9 years old and it was just the coolest thing. My dad's been a salesman for 25, 30 years, very well respected. We're from Tacoma, Washington. I live in Seattle now. He had this customer who owned all these vending machines and was trying to get rid of them. So he bought one off of him for a couple $100. Literally, I'm sitting in the living room, home from school, probably working on homework, doing something. And he walks in the door and he plops down this machine in front of me and he goes, "Do you want to start a business?" And of course, 9-year-old me's like, sure. So I learned, okay, don't put your machine next to a window in a non-air conditioned place because all of your chocolate's going to melt. The rat incident of 2011, we don't even talk about that. So I learned all of these skills about how to run a business, how to pitch myself. I was going in when I was 9, my dad was really helping guide me through the process of pitching myself, pitching my machine, all of that. And then by the time I was in high school, I was dragging my cooler around behind me to service these machines, saying hi to the people who work the front desk. "Oh, how's school?" "School's great." "Any issues with the machine?" "No, everything's great." So we would go out once a month, usually Saturday morning for a couple hours. And then once I had 15, it ended up, kind of going into the afternoon. But my dad and I hand rolled every quarter. We went to Costco to buy product. Like it was a really amazing experience that my dad gave me.
That is truly remarkable. I actually have 2 daughters. I have a nearly 8-year-old and an 11-year-old.
Perfect age.
Right? Like I'm thinking, this might be an option.
You were thinking in a few years.
Yeah, in a few years. But oh goodness, I'm late to the game. Wow, that is remarkable. So how did you go from that first one to 15?
Yeah.
Did you take the profits? Like talk me through how that works.
So that was a great learning experience. And I'm really glad you asked that question because I was so anxious to grow my business. I was 10. I was like, yeah, let's build an empire here, in my little Tacoma, Washington neighborhood. But my dad was very strategic and very intentional about, "Tori, you can't buy your next machine until you have the money to do so. Like I loaned you the money for this first machine, and until you can pay me back for that machine and until you have enough money to buy your next one, we can't buy your next one." So it probably took a year, maybe a year and a half of just that one machine in order to buy the next one. And then every machine after that was a lot easier because I had more profits coming in. I was able to manage my money smarter and better. And I was making more money. And so probably by 4 or 5, I was getting in the groove where I could buy another one every couple months if I wanted to. I was 9 when I had my first one. And then by the time I graduated high school or even mid high school, I had 15 machines.
It's funny. I'm thinking about people who have started early like this. We had Sonny Burns on in episode 139, and he actually described quite literally. I never heard this phrasing, but raising capital for his first car flip by working, I kid you not, at Taco Bell for 6 months. That's the phrasing, raising capital, and it reminds me here of what your dad did. I was curious if he bought that first one for you and just made it a gift, but it sounds like you needed to pay back that loan and then you could move on. So in essence, you had to buy that one with the profits and then you could move on to buying the second and subsequent ones.
Yeah. And it was all about teaching responsibility and teaching how to manage a business, right? Is you have to pay back investors in some way at some point. So yeah, it was a really, really amazing thing. And yeah, he just bought it out of the blue. It was kind of literally just like, oh, this one might be cool for Tori. Let's see if this works. And I remember the first time we went out and bought product, I was so excited that I ended up spending probably double what I needed to spend because I hadn't researched. So I just went to like a bulk food store and bought a bunch of product. And then we were literally at Costco the next day and saw that all the product would have cost about half what I spent. And that was just a great learning experience of like, oh, I just wasted money that could have been profit because of a lack of research. So it was just all of these seemingly small, like kind of almost no duh things. But when you're a kid, right, you don't realize this, you don't understand it yet. And so not only hearing somebody say like, be responsible with money, but also the actual act of being responsible, I think was absolutely transformational for me.
Oh my goodness, Tori, I feel like I need multiple episodes with you because we just need to spend more time here and there's so much more, but I think I am going to spend more time here. I will figure out the other half once we get to it. So let's pause on this for a second. You had to work through purchasing your product, pricing your product, pitching your product, placement of your product, profit and loss statements, accounting, paying back your investors, scaling and growing, building a system for it. And you did this as an adolescent. I'm curious, like I kind of want to work through those. What did you find was your profit per vending machine? Like that once you kind of had it in place and you paid off your investor, like what sort of numbers were you rolling around in your mind in terms of this is how much I can make per machine?
It's honestly really hard to say, both because it was quite a long time ago now, and every machine was different. And that's what we really had to figure out was with the vending machine. I mean, we can really dig into this if you want, but with
I
a
really
vending
do
machine,
want to. This is not just a landing pad to the next nose. We can stay here.
So a vending machine, when you think of a vending machine, you probably think of the machines that cost like $2,000 that you put a dollar bill into and you get like chips or a Coke or something like that. These were basically gumball machines, right? You put a quarter in, you get a handful of candy out. So that handful is actually really, really integral to this whole thing, because if you have peanut M&Ms, you probably only want to give 5 or 6, and the machine can only give so much. But if you offer smaller product, like we had chocolate covered raisins, we had trail mix, we had hot tamales, right? You're getting probably more product there than you would something like peanut M&Ms, just because the real estate there is smaller. They're a bigger product. So we got to the point where we're figuring out, okay, this certain setting on the machine will give you, 8 peanut M&Ms, and this setting will give you 3. And obviously 3 was too stingy, so we had to figure out something in between that. And then we'd have people coming up and requesting different products. So every machine and every location obviously had different customers. And so people would come to us and be like, oh, my favorite candy is Skittles, or my favorite candy is, whatever. And so we got to the point where we really narrowed down. We tried to play that game for too long of like trying to keep everybody happy, but not realizing that like we had too many SKUs basically of if we had 6 or 7 or 8 products, but they only went in 1 or 2 machines, like that was not a good investment. That was not smart of us. So we got to the point where we had like 4 integral products, which were peanut M&Ms, hot tamales, trail mix, and chocolate covered raisins. And that took probably 7 years just to get to those like 4. We tried chocolate covered espresso beans, but those would melt. They would also get stuck because they were bigger and they were more expensive. We had to go to a specialty food store to get those. And you can't charge more, right? You can't say, oh, for this product, I want 2 quarters. That's not how the machine works. So you either have to change your product or scale it back so you can limit how much they get in a handful. And then, like I said, there was all of these other things where, okay, if it got caught in the machine, if the machine was by a window and the chocolate melted, there's all of these things to think about, as well as the placement of the machine. A lot of these were my dad's customers, and that's how I got an intro into the business. They were in the break room at like construction companies. So the placement of the machine had to be where there was a lot of foot traffic. And there was also usually a lot of machines that would be competitors of ours. So I remember the first time, and again, I'm 9, the first place I put the machine, about 6 months after that, they put in a big vending machine, like the $2,000 vending machine. And I remember feeling devastated because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to compete. And that was a whole lesson of my dad just being like, no, you just got to keep playing your game. You got to keep doing what you need to do, because I was different. It wasn't a dollar bill, it was a quarter. And so understanding that, yeah, you just got to play your game. And it ended up working out just fine. And they ended up, I think, having issues with the machine where the machine didn't work. And I was just steady Eddie and kept, coming in and yeah, servicing my machine. And everybody knew it was for my college fund too. And I'd give free samples. And it was also just like a feel good story. So it was hard to tell a 9-year-old who was saving for a college fund no.
Okay, that's the setup right here. So let's position ourselves in the situation of a parent working with a child. The child's wanting to start their first business, and effectively they're having to pitch their service. It may be a vending machine service, but it's any number of services or businesses that are started by kids. I'm just wondering, like, because your story is negotiation. Negotiation is loosely tied to selling yourself, selling your vision for what should be. Yeah. When you're a kid, and the few times that you did have to make a cold pitch, or maybe it was a slightly warm pitch, but you still had to sell what you wanted to do. Like, what did that pitch look like when you're getting, because effectively you have the machines, but you don't have the real estate. You're having to ask someone permission to use the real estate. What did that conversation look like?
Something that we did really smart that I didn't even realize was smart is we asked for the space rent free. We didn't have to pay to put the machine in there. It was just kind of the goodwill of what I was doing and the learning experience. So yeah, to your point, my dad would usually set it up. It'd usually be a warm lead. And probably the first 2 or 3 years, he led most of those conversations. Because at 10 years old, I was pretty terrified. But it was just watching my dad go through that process. And then he would kind of insert me into that. And I probably still have it somewhere, a contract that was written in Microsoft Word that was probably 3 sentences long that basically said, in exchange for you keeping my machine here rent free, I will keep it clean and full of tasty snacks. And that was the contract. And I would sign it, and I probably have, again, my 10-year-old signature somewhere. But that was the contract we set upon, was in exchange for you allowing me to keep my machine here, I will keep the machine clean, I'll keep it full, and there's going to be tasty snacks. And
it really can be that simple.
Yeah, really.
It was
That's
so simple. And it was just learning. I have a theater degree as well as been acting my entire life. And you learn how to pitch yourself, and you learn that you're going to hear no. Like, that's always the joke in the theater community, is you're going to hear no 99 times until you get a yes. And that was the same thing. Like, most of the time it was really hard to say no to me as a 9-year-old, an ambitious, eager 9-year-old. But there were some times where they already had machines, or it just didn't make sense. And so there was some times where I heard no. And so even learning that of, like, it might not even be about me. It might not be about my business. It might just not be the right time. That was so important, of being able to pitch myself and hearing no, and not being utterly, completely, devastated to the point where I wasn't able to move forward, and just understanding, like, okay, there's something else out there too, I think was amazing.
Maybe we don't know the profit per vending machine, but certainly you are making profit. When you look back, I believe your story is that between what you and your parents figured out, you graduated college debt-free?
I did. It was definitely not the vending machines. I mean, I was like quarter vending machines. Like, we didn't make a substantial amount of money.
It's not completely.
I mean, it is. It is significant. It was more, I think, the whole reason behind why my dad helped me start the business was to start the business. Like, it wasn't about the money, of course. Like, it was truly to figure out, like, how to run a business, how to pitch myself, how to become confident doing that. So yeah, it contributed to my college education, but I mean, my merit scholarships were much more substantial. The money I had saved from, like, working a summer job and working during my senior year of high school, like, that was much more substantial. But yeah, I was able to graduate college debt free, and that's part of my story that I like to acknowledge, is the privilege of that I wouldn't be close to 100K at 25 if I hadn't had that privilege of graduating debt free. So Yeah, it was not a silver spoon. Like my parents did help financially, but it was very much a collaborative conversation where we would sit down before every semester and we'd say, okay, how are we going to pay for this? And so it'd be like, Tori, what are you going to contribute? So I'd say, I brought in these scholarships. I worked 3 jobs while I was in school. I worked 3 on-campus jobs and then worked a summer job as well. And then again, got a bunch of merit scholarships and really worked my tail off to be able to get as many scholarships as I could. And then had my parents not only emotionally support me, but help financially support me through school. I'm an only child as well. And so that was something else, is they were really frugally responsible in saving for my own college, but it was also just me. So yeah, it's a privilege I like to acknowledge as part of my story, that I wouldn't have been as close to my 100K this soon. But it was very much a collaborative process with my family and I. It was not just, here's a check, go have fun, go study something fun. It was very much like, we're gonna work towards this goal together.
Tori, to me, there's a huge distinction between privilege, which you've obviously rightly acknowledged, and being spoiled. My own family has talked about this because lots of people look at those that kind of have it together, or in our case, it's not a secret that we're financially independent.
Right.
I know my daughters have heard that word, or, hey, you guys traveled for 3 weeks to go to Hawaii, these kind of things. But I think to me, spoiled is a frame of mind. For you, and how I teach my own daughters, it's about learning lessons. It's like you said, you had 3
Right.
jobs, you had this business, you earned these merit scholarships. While there is some privilege, you weren't spoiled by any means. Your parents were teaching you lessons that have helped you dramatically in your life. And
Right.
those lessons that started at 9, or certainly probably before then, they're going to carry with you for a lifetime. And I really wanted to stop and pause on that, because while sure you had some privilege, man, these have been amazing lessons. And what you've done with your life is remarkable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's privilege plus hard work, right? I didn't blow it. So they gave me opportunities and I didn't blow those opportunities. My parents really, their greatest investment, and this is going to like make me tear up a little bit, their greatest investment was me. Truly. So they were putting their time, their energy, their love and care and their money into me in the hopes that, yeah, I wouldn't take that for granted and do something with it. So yeah, to your point, I think it's not only setting kids up for success, but understanding like they have to run across the finish line. You can hand them the baton, but they have to still keep going. Privilege is part of my story. I am the first to acknowledge that, but it was also like me, with that privilege comes this responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think the don't waste it comes through pretty strong and clear. What I wanted to talk about is the segue here into negotiation. So part of your story is that you didn't have student loan debt, and we kind of documented how we got there. But the second half of this is you negotiated the salary for every single job you ever had. And I personally, and Brad personally, like, I don't know if we have ever negotiated. I mean, maybe we fought for things at a smaller level, but I don't know how intentional it was. And you came out the gate saying, not only do I believe that negotiation is an important part of my path to my first 100K, but at somewhere along the way, you realized that this is something that you wanted to empower other people, in particular women, to take on this skill set as well. I'm curious when that mindset shift happened for you, when it went well, first of all, how you acquired it, and then when it went from an internal tactic to something that you wanted to tell other people about.
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but I think it was just I got so many questions from my female friends and female peers who it was, okay, I know I should be negotiating, but I don't know how, or you negotiated, didn't you? Or what did you learn from that whole process? And I realized that we as women especially, we know about the pay gap, right? We hear this a lot of 78 cents to a man's dollar, depending on what statistic you read. And it's even worse for a woman of color. So we hear you should be negotiating, but very few people actually tell you how to do it and how to feel confident enough to do it. Women in society are unfortunately told you just should be grateful for your opportunities and you should just be comfortable and good with that. And negotiation is literally pushing back on that, being grateful, of course, but also saying like, no, I'm worthy and deserving of more, and not just an arbitrary number out of the air, but like, here's the data to back it up. And so it's really hard, I think, when you're trying to negotiate as a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, to be able to advocate for yourself and to know your worth and be able to advocate for that. But also at the same time, society has been pushing back on you the entire time of like, oh, but what if you lose the job? Like, what if they don't think you're grateful? What if they don't think you're deserving of this? And so I'm really trying to give women tools that I learned in order to feel not only confident in your negotiation, but here are like the exact things to say. Here's what to do if they say no. Here's where you can push back. And so I learned that from my own experience, and I'm still learning all the time around how to negotiate and how to do it well. But I think it's just a really big black box right now. We're told we should be negotiating, but no one's actually talking you through the process of doing that.
Yeah, I think in all honesty, I was underpaid for the vast majority of my career because
I think most people are.
yeah, right? Because I didn't have the skills to negotiate or really the guts to negotiate upfront. That stuck with me for my entire career because I was on that pay scale and all my raises were based on that original number. So let's get down to like real actionable steps. What are the first thing or things that people should be thinking about? Because I assume they have to do some research, right? It's not just,
Yes.
hey, walk in there and just, I deserve a raise or I deserve more. Like, where does someone start?
The reason we don't pull a number out of the air is twofold. One is that it's not backed in data, right? So your employer could be like, there's no reason to give you that raise or no reason to give you that starting salary. If you're just pulling it out of nowhere, they don't have any incentive to give you that. The second thing is that you're not going to feel as confident going into a negotiation if you don't have data. Like it's just going to feel again like you're pulling a number out of the sky. And so data and research is the first key thing to a negotiation. So you're looking at places like Glassdoor, pay scale to get a good idea of, yeah, what am I paid, or should I be paid? So you're looking at, okay, it's this job title with this experience level, with this education level in this city. So I work in marketing for my 9 to 5. A social media manager position in Seattle, where I live, is going to be paid very differently than a social media manager position in Detroit or Miami, right? So it's not only just about the job you're doing and the skills you have, but also your location. I really recommend as well, a lot of these online sites, the Glassdoors, the PayScales, they unfortunately kind of see you as a two-dimensional person. I think PayScale does a better job at this than Glassdoor. They really ask you a lot of questions to dig in deeper, but it is kind of, here's the job title, here's your location, and here's the salary data. That doesn't see you as a three-dimensional person who has these certain skills and maybe this education level and is also doing this particular job requirement. So have conversations with colleagues. Like if you feel comfortable enough to have them with people at your current work, or go outside, go to your network and say, what would you expect this job with X skills to pay? And so give them the job description, give them the work you're doing, and then ask them to price it. So if I work in marketing, I'm talking to other people who work in marketing or other hiring managers who are hiring for marketing roles, who have a good understanding of the skills and necessary expectations for these jobs. And what does that equate to as far as a salary and a compensation package?
There's a slight nuance to what you said, which I just noticed and I want to come back at, because I think so many of us feel like what we're asking is, hey, what do you make to your peers or coworkers? Which is, I'm not saying it shouldn't be had. I like pay transparency generally, but it feels like a very threatening and a question that could backfire. Whereas what you just said is, hey, here is this position that I'm going to be going for. How would you price this? And you're effectively getting the same answer, but you're doing it in a very non-threatening way, especially if you're working in the company. Both of you working currently in the company. We were talking to Jean Chatsky, and we were talking, highlighting like how would someone go about finding out what their peers are making. And she was making the case that the best time to ask, is when someone is leaving, or when you're leaving, you just pay it forward by letting some of your peers know what you're making. And that's a great way that you can promote pay transparency at a grassroots level without creating a toxic work environment. Maybe not the perfect scenario. Go ahead.
You can also say something like, are you comfortable telling me, are you making above or below this number? So you can say, are you making above 80,000? Yes. Okay. Are you making above 100,000? No. Okay. So they're making somewhere between 80 and 100. That's even a good base foundation for where you need to go and moving forward. So that's a great question that it's, again, the same sort of thing, but it's less like, what do you make? Like, tell me now, which can sometimes really freak people out. So yeah, to your point, it's more about pricing the role. And especially you're asking people that are probably not doing the exact same job you're doing. You're asking people who may be hiring for the similar position, or people who have slightly more experience or credibility within this community. So they're able to really price you correctly.
Now, this is what we've just done is we've established a frame of reference. We found the range. Now you have the range and you talked about how that can bring confidence. But what I want to go into is to some degree the script. And I get that this is what you do. So on a personal level, you help people tailor this to their unique situation. But at a macro level, I think all of us would feel more comfortable if we had a framework for the general script. What needs to be accomplished as we go into salary negotiation? What's the next step for someone that feels confident about the range?
Yeah, so I do this in a virtual workshop. It's called Navigating the Negotiation, and I talk literally through the exact script. I call it the gratitude sandwich. And it works especially well for women because, again, we're supposed to be grateful. We're using that to our advantage. The first piece of bread is gratitude. So when you get your offer, when you get whatever, maybe it's your annual review and they've given you a cost of living increase, or maybe they've given you a slight raise, you're going to thank them for the offer. You're going to be grateful. You're going to thank them for the interview. You're going to say something like, I felt right at home during this interview process. I'm so inspired by this role and I can't wait to start work. And so you're going to thank them. That's the first piece of bread is gratitude. The meat of the sandwich is your data and your ask. So you're going to say something like, based on market data, my skills, my education level, to be compensated fairly, I'm looking at a range of X to Y. Now, let's say hypothetically, this job, they're offering you 60, you've done your research and you know you should be at 70,000. We're not going to ask for 70,000. Negotiations are collaborations, not conflicts. They're not like, put on your boxing gloves, unsheath your sword. If that's what you're thinking of a negotiation as, that's not a negotiation. That's an argument. That's a fight. So you're going to have to realize that it's going to be a compromise at the end of the day. You should be getting something you want and the other person should be too. So if you ask for 70 and they're at 60, they're only going to give you 65 or 62, right? That's better than we started off, but that's not your market rate. That's not where we want to be. So if you know you should be at 70 based on your market research, we want to ask for something like 75 to 78 because we're going to ask for a little bit more with the expectation that we're going to land at 70 or 72. And that's ideal. And I've actually had it happen to me where they were at 60, I asked for 80 and they gave me 80.
Wow.
So sometimes that happens. You want to ask for slightly more than you're looking for, just like they're underpricing you with the expectation that you're going to negotiate. You want to overprice yourself knowing that you're going to have to negotiate back.
But also I wanted to point out that you did this in the context of a range. It wasn't just here's my number. It was based on market data. The range that I'm comfortable with is this to this.
Right. Yeah. And you're going to say to be fairly compensated, which is showing them like, oh, I want to be paid fairly. I've done my research. And like, if you don't pay me this range, you're not compensating me fairly. And then I like to say it's the condiments. It's a collaborative statement. So after you've given your data and your ask, you're going to say something like, I want to get to a number we can collaboratively agree on. I'm going to say that again. I want to get to a number we can collaboratively agree on. It shows you're willing to play ball. It shows you're willing to have a conversation about compensation, but at the same time, you know your worth, you know your value, you're cemented in that. And then the last piece of the gratitude sandwich is bread again. So something, a gratitude statement. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I can't wait to get started. Really looking forward to working with you on this. Really looking forward to the next 6 months and being able to execute our goals, something like that. So that for me is the negotiation script. That's the gratitude sandwich.
Yeah, I love that. And I love just really the words that you're using. They exude confidence, research, and power, frankly, right? Like,
right.
You're saying to be compensated fairly. I love that.
The implication being if they don't do that, they are taking an unfair position.
Right.
And that we can collaboratively agree on. Like that is, it's brilliant. Those two together. How do you disagree with that in essence, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm the jerk.
Negotiations,
I'm the jerk.
Collaboration's not conflicts. Right. Collaboration's not conflicts. Like if you're coming in there expecting a battle, and I think that's what most of us think negotiations to be, right? We're going to have to fight for what we're worth. We have to put on our battle armor. Like that's not a negotiation, truly. Too many women also think, oh, if I negotiate, I'm going to lose the job or I'm going to lose the opportunity. I get that all of the time from women. They're like, I'm too scared to negotiate. What if they revoke the offer? It doesn't happen. And if it does, that is not a company you want to work for anyway. If they're willing to take away your offer just because you wanted to have a kind, considerate conversation about compensation, they just did you a favor because they're not a company that's going to see value in you. And they're not a company you want to work for anyway. So it doesn't happen. If it does, very rarely, it's not a company you want to bother with.
Let me ask you just a slight reframe on that. And I'm not saying that this is actually what the response is, but I could see someone being worried that it is. And the boss comes back with, Well, nobody on our team makes that. I don't
then
make that.
no one's being compensated fairly. That's a huge red flag then. Like if that's either A, a lie, or B, a red flag, right? That's either he is not willing to talk to you about negotiation in an honest, upfront way, or that's just not a great company to work for. They're not interested in actually valuing their employees with a fair compensation.
Interesting.
So
We
at that point,
consistently across the board underpay everyone. Come work for us.
right. Yeah. So at that point, you have to decide, is this a job I want to take? Or there's always three options with negotiation. You can either accept what they're telling you, you can just flat out say no, or you can counter. Like those are always the three options: is you accept, you flat out say no, or you counter. So those are all the options you have always throughout this entire process. Is you're as much interviewing them as they are you. So you get to decide at any time, like, no, I want to walk.
Yeah, and part of this is that internally, or what you're crushing this. Like that's part of this. This is not work for someone that is not showing up, for someone that's not performing, for someone that hasn't cultivated a skill set. The bar for this is you're bringing it, and
right.
you know your value.
Like,
they'd be lucky to have you.
Should you get a raise if you're not doing good work, right? That's what raises are for. So the first thing that, really before your research, before you ask anything, you need to make sure you're showing up and showing out. Like you need to make sure you're doing good work.
And that's a whole nother process to be able to document not just what you think you could do, but what you have done. And I suspect that that's kind of part of this as well. But I love this.
Yeah, agreed. And Tori, just that little reframe, you're interviewing them. So many people, right? Like so many people sit there and they're just hoping. They're hoping they get lucky, and out of the hundreds of people that are applying, they're going to get picked. And to me, the mental reframe of you're interviewing them, people sense that. I think we've seen that throughout 100+ guests here. It goes back to the old Office Space movie.
Right.
When you're a little bit different, when you have some power because of your pursuit of financial independence, people just get that sense that you're different. So I think
they actually want you more. I think that's the interesting thing, is like too many people are like, oh, I'm afraid of losing the opportunity. I'm afraid of coming off a certain way. You actually are better respected and more valued and more like, oh, okay. It's like, obviously she's worth this because she's willing to stand up for herself. Like that's huge. And so it's not just, of course, the act of negotiating and getting the extra money. It's also like setting expectations of here's what I will allow and here's what I won't allow.
Let me give you a couple anecdotes as well. So personally, as a manager in my corporate job, and then as an employer, I've seen this from the other side, where you have individuals that you just desperately don't want them to leave you. Like that is a really good place for someone that's working with you to be in, is to know that your employer desperately wants to hold on to you. And I'm sure they're listening to this. But in another side from that, that's not just us here. Motley Fool, perfect example. We went down there. They have an office. Well, they have several offices, but they have one in Alexandria. And the company culture there is so profoundly different to anything that I've experienced. They actually, in many ways, have piloted company culture, and their model has been adopted by large corporations. They actually have an Ask Me for a Raise Day that's piloted top down, where they're telling their employees, you're not asking for raises. And that's a problem. You need to come in on this day, and you are required to ask us for a raise and make your pitch for it. And
why don't they just give raises?
Well, that's the problem. It's partial. I mean, you can ask them. I'm sure they'd love to give you that answer. But having an employee engaged in that process is really see your own value, evaluate your own value. Because I think as you go through, what does it look like to ask for a raise? What am I justifying that based on? If you feel like you don't need to, you need to work through that, because that's either something you need to handle on your own, or you at least need to think about it. So I don't have all the answers there, but I actually love it, because this is not something where you need to really sell them. Basically, my understanding from talking to the employees was it was so scary, and I was so happy I did it. And it wasn't scary because of anything that from the top they did. It was open arms. This is a very friendly culture. It was just your internal limiting beliefs had prevented you from ever asking for a raise. So you could just give it to someone, or you could actually have them go through that process and get it because they asked for it. So that has been documented, and you could look into information on that. But I think that is incredible. And it speaks to what you're talking about, which is you got to remove these limiting beliefs that keep you from seeing your own worth, and really start to create a roadmap for being able to have those conversations. Because Tori, see how that confidence spills out, not just in your actual asking for that raise, but in every other thing that you tackle. This is way more than just money. It's seeing that self-value and realizing the value that you bring to a company that you're working with.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further of, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, you're not just negotiating for you, you're negotiating for every woman who comes after you. So every time you're negotiating your pay, every time you're advocating for yourself, you're giving people the permission to advocate for themselves as well. By setting the precedent of, again, here's what I will allow, here's what I won't, here's collaborative statements, not like this is what I expect and I'm not willing to budge, but by knowing your worth, you're helping others also feel confident enough to ask for what they're worth too. So it's not just you, but you're setting up the domino effect for every person that's going to come after you at this company, every person that's going to engage with this manager again. You're setting the precedent. So it's not just about your life, your salary, your compensation level. It's also about all of these other people who are going to really benefit from you doing this first.
So Tori, I know that you have a coaching service where you work with people and do workshops on this. And personally, I know I have a friend in our community. His name's Rich. He writes over at PF Geeks.
Yeah, he's great. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy. And he shared with us that his wife worked with you and you were able to help her negotiate. And I forget the exact number, but it was like a $3,000 or $4,000 like pay increase. And I'm curious, do you have any other anecdotes that you can share with us? Like, what is this information worth? And I guess it would depend on industry or sector, but what have you seen?
To your point, it really does depend. I think she's a teacher. And so she came to me and she's like, I have never negotiated before. They've told us we can't really negotiate. And I'm like, we can always negotiate. So we ended up getting her, a couple $1,000s more, which I was so excited about. I work with women all over the country and now the world actually navigating the salary negotiation process. So I do this in online virtual workshops where you can kind of tune in. It's live. You can go run through the whole gamut of this workshop. It's about 45 minutes and then a 15-minute Q&A at the end. And then I do private one-on-one negotiation coaching. So, I had a woman just a couple weeks ago, also lives in Seattle, works in tech, so had a pretty substantial salary offer already. And then we were able to get her with, I think, total compensation extra, about $30,000 extra.
Wow.
Just not only in the salary number, but in perks and that sort of thing. I think we got her a signing bonus as well. And then I just got I helped get a woman $12,000 extra a couple weeks ago as well. It's all about, even if you don't end up getting anything extra in the negotiation, it's all about the confidence of feeling like, okay, I've done this once, I can do this again. So negotiation is a muscle. I tell people that all the time. The more you're strengthening it, the more you're, showing up, the more you're doing it, the more confident you're going to feel later. And it's not just about salary either. There's a million other things you can negotiate. PTO, a work from home flexible work policy, a education stipend, a signing bonus, a relocation bonus, stock options. There's a lot of other things you can negotiate, either if you're not comfortable negotiating salary yet, or you're being compensated fairly on salary, which good for you, because that's not usual for people. Or if your employer or your potential employer is not willing to budge on the actual compensation, there's a million other things you can negotiate that'll add to your total compensation package.
And Tori, I'm on your website now, herfirst100k.com, and I'm seeing where you can join these workshops. Are these for women only? Are men welcome in these workshops?
Men are most definitely welcome. They are geared towards women because they're specifically around we have to negotiate differently as women. I've worked with men who are clients in the past, and it's so interesting the way they approach negotiation versus women. Like, men are very much like, here's my number, like, take it or leave it. And it works for them. Women, unfortunately, we, in most cases, cannot do that. It just doesn't work. So I use like the gratitude sandwich as well as the rest of my workshop. That is universal. It doesn't matter whether you're a male or a female, but I gear most of my workshops and my coaching towards women specifically because we're the ones who really need this advice, I think, more than anybody else, as well as like we just have to negotiate sometimes differently because of these different expectations society has on us. But no, I work with men all the time. These are not just specifically women only.
I want to point something out to our audience. And we highlighted this back in episode, I believe it's 23 of our podcast with Earn, Save, Invest. In that particular episode, he was pointing out that your baseline salary, whatever you negotiate, it's way more than just what you're making there. Every additional raise that you get is a percentage. And if you negotiate a higher baseline, all of your 3% and 4%, 8% raises year over year that you get are obviously exponentially more valuable. What's amazing is you may not be getting underpaid, but if you don't negotiate, you're certainly not getting overpaid. You're certainly not.
Yeah.
The people that are making the most are the ones that are paying attention. Why would an employer just voluntarily pay you more? Why would they? There's no incentive for them to do that. And so if you want to be at the upper end of the range, you need to be the squeaky wheel. And then likely
Right.
you need to use some tactics in order to get there. You need to have the confidence to engage in those conversations. But if you do that, you get, more or less the passive approach will then be more valuable for you every single year. So while everybody, 1 year say, oh, we're not doing raises this year, we're just doing cost of living adjustments. Your cost of living adjustment is more valuable because you negotiated when the sun was shining.
Right.
It's critical.
You are your own advocate. No one will advocate for yourself better than you will. And I'll hit you with this statistic. Women who negotiate on average make $1 million more over their career than women who do not.
Wow. Is that
$1
possible?
million more? Yes, because it's also your investment earnings. If you take that extra money that you're earning now, that's going to earn you money in the future because you're setting yourself up for a better base salary. But it's also not just about the money physically now, but that's going to grow if you invest that money. So it's not just the $2,000 or $3,000 that you can put in a checking account. If you end up investing that money, who knows what that could turn into? So yeah, $1 million more on average than women who do not negotiate.
Do you think there will be women listening to this episode that look back 20 years from now and said, this episode was worth $1 million to me?
I would love that. That would be ideal. Yeah. It's so powerful once you start doing it, just from a self-worth perspective too. Once you start advocating for your worth, you will advocate for your worth in every other part of your life. Once you start advocating for your salary and your compensation, you will show up for the rest of your life in every facet and asset of your life. It's so incredible, the feeling of negotiating, being successful, or at least being successful in the fact that you did it, you tried it, and knowing that you can do anything else that demands your worth.
Tori, you're bringing it with this episode. This is incredible. and I think you see how excited we are about this and sharing this with our audience. I guess I got to ask, it's hard to believe that you're just turning 25 years old. The wisdom that you're sharing with us, I'm learning so much from this, and it's profound. What is next for you?
Man, I believe I was put on this earth to fight for women's financial rights. So I'm continuing to grow her first 100K. I'm doing workshops. I do corporate speaking. So if you're listening to this and your company has a lunch and learn program or something like that, bring me in to speak. That's the best part because you don't have to pay for it. Your company gets to pay for it. So yeah, I do workshops. I do coaching. I'm continuing to expand that. And it's my favorite thing in the world to be able to give women resources to not only get more money, but learn how to keep it and grow it. So I think having a financial education is a woman's best form of protest. And I truly believe that we as women do not have any sort of equality until we have financial equality. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to give resources to women so they feel like they can finally manage their money in a confident way as opposed to their money managing them.
I can't wait to see the feedback on this episode. On most shows, that would be the end of the episode. But on our show, Tori, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Tori, question number 1. What is your favorite blog, podcast, or book of all time?
My favorite book of all time is The Great Gatsby. I annotate it for fun. It's probably one of the nerdiest things about me. But yeah, I love that book so much. I love that you can read it without any of the symbolism and without the English class version. And it's just a great entertaining book. And then also when you dig a level deeper, it's just, it's so great.
Question number 2, inflection points in your life that were especially memorable or meaningful.
I took a job for the money when my gut was telling me not to. And it ended up being one of the worst decisions I ever made, but I learned a ton from it. So by day 2, I knew the job wasn't right. And after 10 weeks, it was so toxic, I had to quit without another job lined up. And I spent 3 months unemployed. So I'd actually be way closer to 100K if this all hadn't happened. But it was so important in me realizing that money's great, building wealth is great, but your happiness and where you're spending 40 plus hours a week is way more important than an extra $10,000, $15,000 truly. And trusting your gut is your best barometer for how you're going to move through life. And that was just a great experience. And I'm really glad I had young to be able to make decisions, make really good decisions that sat well with me for the rest of my life.
This may be, an obvious follow-up point, but since you found yourself in that situation and you weren't listening to your gut, without actually, digging up all the exact circumstances, what are the warning signs from someone that are like applying to a situation that, what flags should you be listening to tell you, no, don't go there. No price is worth that.
When I talked to my parents, I'm still really close to my family. They were like, well, what's exactly wrong with it? And I couldn't exactly pinpoint. And that was my gut telling me, like, I didn't have a good enough reason to tell them, like, I didn't want to take this job, but that was it. Like, that was my gut talking to me. One of the other things, like the job, I said I was able to negotiate $20,000 more. I asked for 80, they gave me 80. At the time, I thought it was just, oh yeah, I'm just awesome. Like, I'm just killing it out here. And I didn't realize that it was more desperation. They hadn't had somebody in that role in 6 months. They'd been trying to find somebody, couldn't find somebody for this role. And so they gave me a $20,000 jump literally within like 5 minutes. Like, there was no back and forth. They didn't ask for any of my data around that. They just said yes. And so knowing what I know now, that was an act of desperation, not necessarily, yeah, you're awesome, we'll give you $20,000 more without even blinking an eye. So that was something that I know now is something to be cautious about moving forward.
Yeah, and I think what you said in there, which is sometimes I don't know why, but I have to trust my gut. I think people would be well served listening to that advice for sure. All right, Tori, question number 3, your favorite life hack.
Getting enough sleep. Does that count?
Oh, well, that certainly counts.
If I get less than 7 hours of sleep, I literally feel like I've been hit by a truck. Like, I cannot function. And as someone who works a 9 to 5, and then this is actually my side hustle, which that's a whole other conversation, but I really value my sleep. If I don't get my stuff done, none of the rest of this gets done. So if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not making sure I'm sleeping and eating well and exercising and going to therapy and taking care of my mental health, if I'm not showing up for myself, I can't show up for my clients. I can't show up for anybody else. So I am my product. If I'm not taking care of my product, none of the rest of this is going to get done. So I really prioritize sleep above all else because I'm not a coffee drinker. Coffee makes me see sounds. I am absolutely insane on coffee. And so I have to get enough sleep or just like life doesn't function.
Oh, I love them both so much. Fortunately, they're very kumbaya with each other for me. So
yeah.
Question number 4, the biggest financial mistake you've made.
I think taking the job for the money without trusting my gut, it made sense in the moment of like, okay, I'm going to get $10,000 more, but I ended up paying for it later by being unemployed. So I, of course, wasn't making money. And then I also was spending my emergency fund. So I think that was probably the biggest financial error I made. Glad I made it, though. Again, taught me so much about all of this.
Yeah, there's this fine line, and it's an additional conversation. Maybe we could circle back to it on a Friday roundup, but the marginal utility of money as well. I mean, if you're taking the money, that's the only thing that would get you to take on this toxic situation is this extra 5 or 10 or 15, or in your case, 20K, like almost nothing makes it worth it. And you just got to sift through that. So there's probably some guidance there on how to determine when to take the money for extra responsibility, but there's a line between responsibility and toxicity.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Worry less. I would tell yesterday me worry less, and I'd tell tomorrow me worry less too. But I'm an anxious person, I think, in general. I'm so ambitious that I'm so worried that I'm wasting time if, something doesn't pan out or that I'm taking the wrong path. I worry a lot. I worried a lot in college about landing a job. I worried a lot in high school about getting into a good college. I think we do this for our entire lives. We worry that maybe our job isn't going to be able to support our family that we want and that we're not going to be able to support our retirement. And then by the retirement comes, we're close to the age where we pass away. And so for me, it's a constant reminder to really just worry less, focus on what's good, understand that everything's going to work out. Even if in the moment it's not, like there's a reason why this is happening. There's a reason why this is going to get you to the next step you need to go in your journey. So I would just say, Tori, take a chill pill. Worry less.
Yeah, I certainly hear you. I actually had a very similar conversation with my 11-year-old daughter. She was talking about worrying about something. And to me, just from like a strategic standpoint, if you want to look at it like as oddly as this, worrying about it for her in this situation, like it wasn't going to impact how things turned out at all. It was just
Right.
making her current life worse.
Right.
So from a sheer strategic standpoint, it's suboptimal, And I say that
Right.
kind of jokingly, but like it didn't help her. And I think just seeing that made her realize, oh, I really shouldn't be spending this time worrying about something that I can't impact. Clearly,
Right.
if there are ways that you can impact a situation, okay, maybe put those steps in place, right? That's a separate issue. But worrying for the sake of worry, and believe me, Tori, I've been there many, many, many times. But it just is silly, right? So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting that we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion.
I play the what's the worst that can happen game, and that actually helps. Of like, okay, if I'm actually worried about this, what is the absolute worst that can happen? And usually the worst is still I could handle it. And so that actually helps me a lot of like, what is the worst possible thing in this moment that could go wrong? And understanding that A, that's probably not likely. And B, if God forbid that did happen, I would be able to get through it. I'd be fine. So I like to play that game with myself. I find that in a weird psychotic way that actually helps.
No, I could certainly see that. All right, Tori, we've got one last bonus question here for you. What is the purchase that you've made in, let's say, roughly the last year or so that has added the most value to your life?
It's not necessarily a purchase, but I choose to live alone in Seattle. And that is my favorite thing in the world. I don't have a roommate. I choose to rent an apartment that is substantially expensive because of Seattle. But I walk around the house naked. I leave dishes in the sink when I want to leave dishes in the sink. Like it is brought me so much happiness, and I'm willing to pay more money for something that allows me this flexibility and this joy. So the purchase of my rent every month, although sometimes thinking about FI and thinking about all these things like, oh, I could cut my costs in this area, get a roommate and, probably cut it in half or maybe, by a couple $100. But the joy I get and the benefit it adds to my life, I think makes it worth it for me.
Well, if it's a value proposition, it looks like you have figured out a way to thrive even with that choice. And so that's incredible. Tori, thank you so much for coming on the show. Someone that is listening to this wants to find out more about you, your content, and your workshops. What is the best way to connect with you?
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for months. Herfirst100k.com is where you can find me. HERFIRST100k.com. I'm also on Instagram. That's my primary social media platform. I'm way cooler on Instagram. So come follow me on Instagram. It's at Herfirst100k. But come say hi, ask me questions, slide in my DMs, come take a workshop. It's my favorite thing in the world. So I'd love to hear from you.
Tori, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
To our audience, if you got value from today's episode, and if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take 1 second and press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. It just lets the providers know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at ChooseFI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. To do that, just go to ChooseFI.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to ChooseFI.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to ChooseFI.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 100. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.
All right, everyone, you'll have to forgive me for this one extra book plug. This is book launch week for our book, ChooseFI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. Go get a copy this week or buy one for a friend if you've got this concept locked down. To do that, go to ChooseFI.com/book. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.